Uh, Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar from Why Should I Visit, featuring me, Colin. I'm Colin. And today we're talking about New Orleans. New Orleans. I thought a lot about whether I should try and pronounce it consistently throughout the talk. Decided that wasn't going to happen. But I'm going to make the case that New Orleans is a city that everyone should go to, every American should go to. And it's a city that, like, apparently a lot of you are sleeping on. I didn't actually realize this until I was talking to someone at work about doing this webinar. And he said, well, I've never been. My wife went for a conference once, and like it's on my list, but I don't know. And it's like you should go. Everyone should go. Like, and you should go now. Because like it's not going to be around for your grandkids. In part, it won't be around for your grandkids because you flew down there, but like that's a bit of hypocrisy that I'm not going to get into tonight. But anyways, go visit New Orleans. Anyways, where's New Orleans? New Orleans is in Louisiana, in the United States of America, a former British colony with a large amount of social unrest in the Western Hemisphere. This is where it is. I do think some people who haven't looked at a map recently, I feel like they're a little surprised about sort of where it sits in relation to the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, and then Lake Pontchartrain at the north there. But it is a city sitting on a bend in the Mississippi River, which automatically makes it cool, right, St. Paul folks? And we're going to be focused really on the sort of the core downtown in New Orleans. I'll have another map in a little bit where we're actually going to look at some of the different neighborhoods in New Orleans where we talk about where you might want to stay and hang out. And I haven't done a lot of day trips or other traveling in Louisiana because like this is the red state part of that state. Haven't really gotten into that, but so we're just talking about the city today. So normal agenda, why you're going to love it, what you'll do, logistics, Q&A. As I go through the talk here, if you have questions you want to ask, there should be a little button down in your Zoom bar or up in your Zoom bar or wherever your Zoom bar is that says Q&A. And you can click that and then you can type stuff in there. And then at the end, I will answer those things. And if not, I'll just pretend you asked things and then I'll answer the questions I have in my head. So why are you going to love New Orleans? Gosh, now I'm really overthinking how I say it. First off, here's a controversial opinion. I think it's the best food city in the United States. Now, that's not to say that like, there aren't a lot of cities where you can get amazing food, right? But like if you go to New York, of course you can get amazing food there. It's like New York, it's a world capital. Same for DC or LA, right? LA, strong contender for this category as well. But what New Orleans brings to the situation is a ton of really unique food, a really strong culture of food where there's just an expectation that like if you're cooking food for people, you better do a really good job of it. And so there is this sort of just cultural conversation around food. It's woven into so much of the life of the city. Of course, you've got amazing high-end restaurants serving food from all around the world, but you also have this huge mix of sort of different food cultures coming together in New Orleans that I think makes it as a foodie just a city. Again, if you're into food, you need to get to New Orleans. You need to spend a bunch of time eating. Obviously, we're going to talk about food more as we get into this talk. I think you'll also love it, of course, because of the sort of music scene, the social scene. And I think for me, as someone who's like a non-drinker, who's very much not into partying, I probably wrote off New Orleans a little bit until I was sort of forced down there for conferences and things and had my eyes opened because, I've seen MTV Spring Break in the 90s or whatever. I know what New Orleans is all about. It's beads and drunken people and whatever. And I think what I was surprised about is how accessible the sort of music and social scene is for folks who aren't interested in that sort of horrible side of it. And we're going to talk quite a bit more about how to avoid the horrible side of it. But it is a city where you have an incredibly high standard of musicianship, sort of seemingly among everyone who lives there. And it's accessible in a really authentic way. It doesn't feel manufactured in the way that it does in some cities, Nashville, whereas here in New Orleans, it just feels really authentically accessible. And finally, like it is a really gorgeous city that you can go explore, and you're going to see sort of beautiful architecture that is really unique to New Orleans, not just unique to the South or to this part of the United States, but really is unique to New Orleans owing to its, unique history in America. And I think it's just a really great city to wander around. And as you're wandering around, to talk to people. One of the things you'll see in my pictures, I tend to not take, I don't tend to take photos of people, like strangers I've just met, like not my thing. So, but one of the things I love to do when I'm in New Orleans is just say hi to people who are sitting on their stoops, chat with folks, talk about the weather, talk about the day, talk about food when we're, eating a sandwich or something, and get a sense of what they're all about. And New Orleans is just a great city to make those really authentic connections with people. And people are incredibly kind and welcoming. And I've just had some amazing, really fun conversations that turn into adventures and things like that. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do in New Orleans? First off, as seems to be the trend the last few weeks, I'm going to throw a couple pieces of media your way. Couple books and a TV show. Probably not huge surprises here. But I had never read Confederacy of Dunces until this winter, before or during a trip down to New Orleans. And again, Pulitzer Prize winning book, somewhat problematic in our current time, as most things from the 1970s are. But I thought I really enjoyed the sense you got of New Orleans, both at a particular time in history, but also a sense of what persists to this day, right? Obviously, New Orleans has gone through a lot in the 50 years since this book was written. But you read it and then you walk around the city and you think, oh, actually, like you can see the through line. If you want to learn a bit more about what it's been through, The Yellow House is a memoir, which is just stunning in every regard. And it is sort of the history of a family, a New Orleans family, sort of centered around their house, as it grows, as their family grows, as it changes, as it gets destroyed by Katrina, and as the family deals with that and everything else that sort of African-American family living in New Orleans has gone through for the last 70 years. So absolutely recommend The Yellow House. And Treme, not a show that I have sort of binge watched, deep dived. I'm not a David Simon universe person, but many people I love Treme, and I have seen some of it, and it is very good. And so if you're not into books, I would suspect that watching that show would also be an interesting introduction to New Orleans prior to a trip there. So let's also talk briefly about a little terminology. I realized when I was going through a practice of this that I was saying things like, oh, we went and saw the second line parade, and I couldn't find a place to define some of these things. So I won't get into a habit of this, but second line parade, sort of an evolution of the idea that when you had a parade, you would have the official parade, and then you would have all the bits after the official parade where the community groups and whoever else wasn't officially included in the parade would continue on the parade route doing their own thing. Eventually that evolves into its own thing where you decide you don't need the first line, you don't need the Chamber of Commerce float, you could just have a parade. And New Orleans is the king of the world for parades. Maybe Brazil would take issue with that, but anyways, and then two different sort of cultural food terms, Cajun and Creole. A lot of times, especially in food media, these two get sort of compressed together into like Cajun/Creole, and in part that's because there's obviously a lot of fusion and cross-pollination in modern New Orleans cooking, but sort of from an ethnic group perspective, these are two sort of very distinct groups of the Cajuns being sort of French settlers who ended up in Canada and then get kicked out of Canada and end up down in New Orleans. And so you get this sort of French heritage, French techniques in their cooking, French terminology in some of their language and in their accent. And then Creole gets defined all kinds of different ways if you go looking for how do you define Creole? But generally think of sort of mixed race descendants of Europeans and Africans, sort of Afro-Caribbean folks coming up from like Haiti, ending up in New Orleans, and then sort of, all kinds of mingling with lots of other populations to get to sort of the modern Creole culture. But that's where you get a lot more of that sort of West African flavor merging into Caribbean flavor, and then merging with Cajun flavor and all kinds of other things when we talk about food. So let's look at the map in New Orleans a little bit and talk about where we're going to go. I should definitely find better maps instead of just using Google Maps, because of course no one cares where the Home Depot is, but that's all I can see right now. So this is sort of a screenshot of that curve in the Mississippi where New Orleans is snuggling. And the French Quarter, probably an area you've heard of. That's the sort of historic district, historic center of town. That is what is outlined in purple here. And that, from a sort of architecture perspective, is a super unique area. A lot of sort of tourist activities are centered there. There's a lot of very old buildings, churches, and other things there as well. We'll look at a zoomed in shot of the French Quarter in a minute. But I think as a tourist coming to New Orleans, a lot of your sort of activities are going to radiate around the French Quarter, radiate out from the French Quarter. But that may be a place that you're returning to for periodically. Down to the south, or the southwest here, we have the sort of the Garden District, the Lower Garden District, the 11th Ward. This is a little bit more of a suburban area with lots of sort of smaller streets and houses, some really gorgeous architecture dating back to the beginning of the city, and a ton of really fun sort of shopping and boutique streets. So that's a place, it's a fun place to stay, but also a fun place to go for sort of food, shopping, some nightlife, and really just to wander around and check out some really cool houses, houses with really cute little gardens and friendly people hanging out about. Definitely one of my favorite parts of the city. In between the French Quarter and the Garden District, you have sometimes called the sort of warehouse district. And this is sort of a slightly more modern, as in like 1950s, I think, slice of the city. This is where the convention center is. So if you're coming to New Orleans for a big convention, which many of them happen there, that's sort of this area. And the bigger hotels, the sort of chain hotels, the conference hotels, that sort of thing. A lot of those are going to be in this area as well. And there are, as you can see, the National World War II Museum, a handful of other museums here. And if you're really into that sort of, mid 20th century New Orleans history, this is where a lot of that sort of takes place. There's amazing sort of World War II and post-World War II history of industry around New Orleans and the growth that happened then. And a lot of that sort of centers around this part of the city. Up to the north, you've got the Treme neighborhood, the 7th Ward. This, as we'll talk about, is my favorite area to stay in. It is traditionally sort of more of the African-American population. And again, just a really great neighborhood to be walking around. And one of the just fun things about New Orleans is their zoning laws are such that they have much more mixed commercial residential, which always makes a city great, right? Which is, what that means is you can have a block of houses with a donut shop on the corner, right? And so those become gathering points for community. And so you get a lot of that sort of in Treme. You get some streets and neighborhoods with lots of cool little businesses that are, pulling people together. Everyone's hanging out and enjoying themselves. And finally, I just want to call out New Orleans City Park up to the north. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's, as a tourist, if you're on foot wandering around, that's maybe sort of the upper-ish bound of where you're going to go walk to as part of a day out, but an absolutely outstanding sort of treasure of a park. And we'll circle back on that in a little bit. And finally, let's look a little bit more closely at the French Quarter, because there's a couple things we need to cover. First off, this is Bourbon Street. You don't want to go to Bourbon Street. If you're on a webinar about travel at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, you don't want to go to Bourbon Street. That's a thing I know. Honestly, you don't even have to go to like see what the fuss is all about. Like it just it's everything you'd think it is. It smells bad. The people are bad. So if you really want to go, if you really got to like satisfy that curiosity, go at like 10:30 in the morning, right? Like don't go so early that they haven't cleaned up from the night before. But like once you get afternoon, like all bets are off. And if you ever get invited there for like a bachelor party, like get new friends. So you're not going to go to Bourbon Street, but as a middle-aged adult, which you probably are, you might enjoy hanging out on Frenchmen Street. This is not new advice. This is what everyone's going to tell you, which is, hey, if you're not coming to like get drunk and naked, you don't want to go to Bourbon Street. You want to go to Frenchmen Street because Frenchmen Street has all of the really cool bars that have a band playing all the time, every night, great scene without the sort of rowdy, horrible people chaos. And again, I had heard that advice before and I thought, well, that's what people say, but like, it's probably just a tourist trap. It's not, it's like, just great. It's a wonderful place to go. Don't have to like plan in advance. You don't have to see like who's playing where, what shows are out, just go. And when you hear music, which is going to be from like every bar, just go in and it's great. And then when you go to the next bar, the band from the previous bar is going to wander in because they finished their set, but they want to keep playing. So they're going to get up on stage with the current band and they'll all start jamming because it's New Orleans. And then eventually audience members will get up on stage because everyone knows how to play an instrument there and they'll start jamming. And like, that's the vibe. So Frenchmen Street, good place to check out. I mentioned just sort of the beautiful architecture. And one of the things about New Orleans, at least at the moment, is that it's also a city with a ton of really great Airbnb opportunities. And at least as long as that holds true, I think that's the way to go in this city. These are two photos of two of the Airbnbs I've stayed in. You can get either sort of traditional shotgun style house. So this one on the right here, this is a sort of duplex, a side by side. So split this in half and that's two houses, which means it's just a room behind a room behind a room, no hallways. You just walk through each room to get from the front of the house to the back of the house. Really fun experience. And, you know, obviously you're going to be in a really cool neighborhood. You can also get this more sort of stately Victorian, I guess, type of thing on Airbnb. This was a duplex as well, I think, or maybe a quadplex, can't remember. But again, these types of things are super accessible. And again, you know, we've talked about Airbnbs ruining neighborhoods. It's a tough call, but in all the cases I've been in New Orleans, we've been in Airbnbs that are surrounded by like local folks, or actually the very rare occurrence at our last one, half of it is an Airbnb and the other half is the actual owner who lives there with her very nice dogs. And that's always a treat. So definitely think about an Airbnb, the way to go, especially if you're going for a vacation and you're going to be just doing some exploration, especially fun if you've got some sort of outdoor space in the front where you can sit and, you know, have a snack or a drink at night and just say hi to folks who are walking by. That's the way to go to make connections. A lot of the places in the city also have really amazing sort of areas in the back, sort of garden areas, patio areas, some things that are much more sort of European and built out as full sort of little backyard piazza type things. But look for cool places like that. And as I say, when you're out wandering the city, just enjoy seeing this kind of architecture and seeing how people have adapted all of the different structures. As you go, you can also start to see, obviously, a lot of houses that are still undergoing repair from Katrina or from the storms that have come since then. And you can sort of see how the different buildings are being adapted and repurposed and reconstructed, either to deal with sort of future storms or to deal with changes in how people live. I also think New Orleans is a really great city to do some guided tours. Even if they're the cheesy sort of guided tour. This on the left is from a ghost tour. There's a lot of ghost tours in New Orleans, ghost tours, vampire tours, I'm sure all kinds of other sort of creepy type tours. Obviously, a lot of sort of voodoo tours of varying accuracy and sensitivity. But, you know, they're silly, they're touristy. What they're going to do is they're going to make you look up. And that's a thing that I think we all forget to do when we're walking around a city, is we walk around and we keep our eyes level. And what a tour does, whether it's a ghost tour with a guy like this, or a more, fancy architectural tour, they're going to help you look up and look at the second floor balcony or the third floor window and start to enjoy your surroundings a little bit more. And so, find a tour that fits into your schedule and go for it. I would also say, both for reasons of sort of propriety and because you're going to learn a ton, tours are great ways to explore the cemeteries of New Orleans, whether it's sort of the sort of big mausoleum type cemeteries that I think we all associate with New Orleans, or the sort of sprawling sort of folk art hoodoo cemeteries like this one on the right. Getting a tour guide who can take you through one of those spaces and actually explain the sort of religious implications of what you're seeing, explain the history, explain the preservation, all of that. Those are the two ways in which I would totally recommend engaging in a tour in New Orleans. Someone who's just going to walk you around the city, you're probably going to walk around the French Quarter. They might tell you really silly stories about vampires who came in on boats from Europe and were nailed into lead coffins, but you're going to see a bunch of things that you would have missed otherwise. And then learning about the cemeteries of the city, which again are just a really unique part of the city. As you walk around as well, some really killer public art in the city. There's things like this crocheted creature crawling out of a pothole, which has apparently been there for long enough that someone noticed that it wasn't getting fixed, got increasingly angry about it not getting fixed, and then made this thing and then positioned it there, which says a lot of things about how the city's run. And then you also see just amazing sort of street art all throughout the city. I would say there's also some great galleries to be found in New Orleans, a lot of really interesting folk art galleries, studios, and then a lot of high-end art as well. It's very accessible within the city. But certainly there's some great folk art outposts as well within the city. So if that's sort of your vibe, there's a lot of that to be found. But if you're just interested in sort of street art, quirky art, that kind of stuff, the Garden District that we looked at is full of fun shops doing all kinds of really interesting stuff. A lot of pop-up shops that are using, at least right now, using retail that have been vacated by COVID to do sort of short-term installations around quirky things. So a lot of that going on in the city. I would say, though, New Orleans is a city that you don't want to plan too far in advance for, because what you're going to find when you get there is that there's always something going on, and you probably didn't know about it while you were doing your research back in Minnesota. Some of it you might know about. I would say, certainly if you're thinking about a trip, you can find online events calendars and look at what's going on in the city. And so there's almost always some kind of outdoor music festival happening if the weather's sort of accommodating, which is going to be 9 months out of the year or something like that. So Jazz in the Park, Jazz Fest, all kinds of other things, big festivals, small festivals. There's always something happening on a weekend day in New Orleans that you can go and participate in. And so that's the kind of stuff you should, either look for if you can find a good calendar, but don't look too far in advance because, not everyone's a planner like you. If you just get there and you're talking to people, ask them what's going on, or if you see a bunch of people standing in line for something, ask what they're standing in line for. And you'll find really great opportunities like this to participate. On the right, sometimes the opportunities come to you. So this was a photo from a trip down there in April when we were just out walking, and we walked into a parade. And this is a sort of second line parade. It's all the different neighborhood groups out doing their parade stuff. And I was wondering what the parade was all about. And so I went on and I looked up from the Times-Picayune, event calendar, what are the parades happening? What parade is happening in the city today? And there were 3 parades listed for that day. And this was not one of them. So there are 3 other parades happening in other neighborhoods. There was a pride parade and, a jazz parade or whatever, and whatever. There were other parades happening. This is not a big downtown. Other parades happening. And then there's ones like this that aren't even on the event calendar that were just sort of happening. And everyone just hung out, enjoyed. We walked with them and enjoyed all the different groups. And then it passes you by and you keep on going on with your day. So that's one of the things that just makes New Orleans just a delightful city to be in. I mentioned the New Orleans City Park, which is a really outstanding outpost in the city. And this was something we only discovered on our most recent trip and ended up going back to a couple times and really enjoying. It is nominally, according to some very twisted metrics, the largest urban park in America, which it definitely isn't. It's one of those sort of things they tell you that have, asterisks implied about what they actually consider an urban park or whatever, because like Central Park's way bigger. But it's a very large park in a city, which is great. And within it, it contains, what you would expect, ball fields and sort of a river and lakes and all kinds of stuff. It also has the New Orleans Art Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, for now I'm blanking on the exact title, which has a large outdoor sculpture garden sort of built into the park. And you can see me walking there. That's actually a pathway within the sculpture garden because they've sort of installed all of this sculpture within this park environment, just at places that artists feel is the appropriate place to place their sculpture. And it's got some really, really cool installation work, as well as some really cool architecture within the park itself that lets you sort of feel like you're dropping down below the level of the water. And obviously artists are doing really interesting things with that. So that's a great opportunity. There's an amazing farmers market there every weekend as well, in City Park. And it is just a place where you're going to see all kinds of families out having barbecues, having parties, weddings, family gatherings, lots of just joy and music and all kinds of things happening there. And it's a very large park, so you can go out and wander and enjoy that. There are parts of it that are going to give you that very traditional Southern sort of mossy oak tree, look, and then some that are much more open and accessible. Another top tip is one of the things you're probably going to want to do when you're coming to New Orleans is you're going to want to get a beignet, probably a beignet with that sort of hickory coffee that is typical in New Orleans. And if you have heard anything about beignets in New Orleans, you probably know Café du Monde, because you see Café du Monde coffee elsewhere and you've heard about it. And Café du Monde is in the French Quarter. It's a bustling place full of tourists, a lot of tourists. It's pretty intense because they're churning beignets out. They're turning tables as quickly as possible. There's a lot of hubbub, especially at sort of busy times of the day. Well, top tip, they have another location, which is in City Park. And it's the same beignets and the same coffee made by the same people. They make them on site. They're fresh, just like down at the main location, except that it's not as busy. The only people in line are locals, and you can get your beignets and your coffee, and then you can go sit in the park and enjoy them. So that's definitely the way to go. And you can see this photo of Kat enjoying her beignet because that was the picture that I had of the beignets. Also, I don't have an explicit slide for this, but New Orleans, really great donut city. Again, up there with some of the best. And I mean, beignets are okay, but donuts, much better. So consider that. You can get one. You go get beignets. So you said you had them, but then go get donuts as well. As well, New Orleans is sort of full of really museums ranging from world class to very quirky. And a lot of them are really easily accessible and walkable. And so many of them are also sort of centers of cultural opportunities or other things you can do. So this is another area where if I'm going to any city and I want to sort of get plugged into a particular slice of culture, looking at a museum and seeing if they have some sort of events page or calendar and seeing what might be coming up there, oftentimes they're intended for folks who live nearby, but there's no reason you can't sign up and join. And those can be really great opportunities. So I tend not to like these big slides of text, but I pulled together just a few of the museums in New Orleans that, again, range from things like the National World War II Museum, which obviously is a major, important, very large, very well-funded museum, to things like the Backstreet Cultural Museum, which is really a passion project documenting the history of second line parades and all of the different groups, the production of outfits, the production of the parades themselves, the personalities that go into that. So that's where this picture on the left is from. But it's sort of a very small museum in a house, essentially, where you show up and you ring the buzzer and hope that the guy's going to let you in, and really amazing opportunity. And then some other really great opportunities. So like the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, this is one where if you're a foodie coming to New Orleans, it's got, you know, a lot of great history, obviously, of Southern food. The Museum of the American Cocktail is also in the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, but they have a super active events calendar. And so if you want to do, you know, hands-on cooking classes or lectures from sort of people within the Southern Foodways Alliance and other things, a lot of that is sort of housed out of the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. So really great opportunity. And then museums that you might not expect, like the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, again, you know, very unique in the world, unique in the United States museum, documenting a particular slice of Southern and New Orleans history. So definitely go looking. You know, there's art, there's natural science, there's all kinds of other things as well. But I always love the very small, quirky museums, and there's a bunch of them beyond just the Backstreet Cultural Museum that you can find, some of which you're just going to stumble in as you're out walking. I mentioned the New Orleans Jazz Museum on here, that's the big one. But as you walk through neighborhoods, you're going to see all kinds of micro music museums and other things as well. But I've talked an awful lot without talking enough about food. And so I want to talk a little bit about food just to sort of wrap up the stuff you're going to do in New Orleans, because quite honestly, as I said, I do think it's probably the best food city in the United States, the most unique, interesting, dynamic food city in the United States. And there's a handful of foods that I have to have every time I go to New Orleans. And the first one is a po' boy from Domalices. And it should be a catfish po' boy, because that's the only kind of po' boy that matters. You're going to get it with some amazing sort of potato fries. And Domalices is exactly where you want to get a po' boy from, because it's sort of a house that has a counter and a kitchen in it. And occasionally someone will open a door and there'll be like a living room on the other side of the door. Everyone who works there is either sort of part of a family or married into the family or married and divorced part of the family. And so you get all kinds of really fun vibes and conversations in there. And you can get, you know, one of my favorite sandwiches in the world. It's right up there. So Domalices is sort of my go-to. And if you just sit there and enjoy neighborhood gossip, you'll hear very high caliber neighborhood gossip as you enjoy your sandwich in Domalices. One of the other ones that we need to go to on every visit to New Orleans, and I know this is a little more controversial for some of our audience, is Willie Mae's Scotch House, because I think this is maybe my favorite fried chicken in the world. They make sort of the real core of what they make is fried chicken, and then of course with all the different sides that you'd want. This is a family-run place, started in 1957. The founder just passed away recently, but it's still run by the family. And they do big business. It's a hopping place, and they make this very ultra light sort of fried chicken, this very light batter that is just delightful. And then all of the sides, you know, you can watch. It's a sort of kitchen that you walk past as you're squeezing down a hallway to get to the dining room. They're pulling, you know, trays of cornbread muffins out of the oven, and they're making all this stuff as they go. But Willie Mae's Scotch House, you know, I got to go every time I visit. If you don't want to wait a really long time, Willie Mae's is one of those places where you just adjust your internal clock and you say, you know, today we're having lunch at 10:30. Because if you try and show up at noon, you're going to be waiting in quite a line. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, if you're a social butterfly, the line at Willie Mae's is a great chance to meet people from all over, local folks from all around the world. They've upgraded a little bit. There's like a QR code system, so you can hold your place in line digitally once you get there, but there's no reservations or anything like that. And so either go real early and just adjust when you're having lunch that day, or go and plan to wait, you know, 45 minutes, an hour to get in and have your food. Luckily, once you're inside, food comes real quick, you can eat real quick, and you can be on your way. New Orleans also has some just stunningly good, in my opinion, sort of fusion cuisine. And I use fusion in a sort of I don't know. Is fusion only used ironically now? I don't know. But you get things like mofo. And I only went there for the first time this year. This has been on my to-do list since like 2015. And it just had never worked out to get there. And oh my gosh, I am like regretting all of those times that I had any other meal. And so this is, as you might guess, a sort of New Orleans sort of Cajun or Creole food mashed up with Vietnamese food. There is an entire sort of cultural community of Viet Cajun folks in along the Gulf Coast who are folks who've come in from Vietnam as part of the shrimp fishing industry primarily. And so that's where you get things like crawfish banh mi, which is another really fun dish. But this is sort of taking those concepts of that Southern Vietnamese fusion and really elevating it into, honestly, some of the best food I've had. The menu, I should have put the menu in here, is just every single dish is something I would want to eat. And so Muffo is not the only one. There's a ton of places like this that are doing interesting takes on that sort of Cajun or Creole cooking, and bringing other flavors into that scene as well to, you know, just try and do interesting things with those techniques. But this one just blew me away. And the other thing in terms of food that I would call out, which again is something that gosh, I'm just quite a stick in the mud, because this is another thing that I dismissed for quite a while, which is going to a jazz brunch. Jazz brunch is what it sounds like. It's a brunch where there's jazz. There's all kinds of places that you can go do that. We like to go to Bufas. In part, we like to go to Bufas because it's a fun name to say. In part, we go because once we were there and there was a really cute pit bull at the bar. And so now we just go back every time we visit in the hopes that that pit bull will be there. But in part, we go because it's a place where, you know, Sunday morning, 11 a.m., you show up, you can get brunch, and there's going to be the house band playing, and they're amazing. And it's a really great vibe. It's going to be, you know, the people actually coming for brunch, and you should get reservations for brunch. The people coming for brunch are probably going to be mostly tourists, but the people at the bar are going to be all the locals, because they're going to be all the people who are leaving church. So especially, you know, noon or so, they start rolling in. They're coming in their church clothes, and they're coming in to see the band play. And this band is sort of a Ship of Theseus type thing, where the band's been around since 1970 or something, but all the members have changed. And so previous members wander into the bar, and they get up and join in and start dancing or start playing, and people hand off instruments. And, you know, we had the fun experience of the clarinetist on this visit had a reed break. And he said, anyone have a reed for a clarinet? And the guy in the front row pulled one out of his pocket and handed it to him, because it's New Orleans. And of course that happened. And so jazz brunch, again, it can sound kind of cheesy because it's, you know, all the tourist materials and all that. But it's super fun. It just will put a big old smile on your face, and you're going to get things like shrimp and grits, and you can't say no to shrimp and grits. So I think a jazz brunch is a must do. And then finally, you know, as I said, New Orleans is a city with really high expectations around food. And so anyone who's serving food knows that they better serve good food, because, you know, local folks aren't going to tolerate subpar food. And so literally any sort of fair or festival you go to, any outdoor event that's got, you know, food trucks or people with a pop-up tent making gumbo or whatever is going to be outstanding. So this is a little music fair we went to at a brewery. Everyone just, you know, set up their tents and their chairs and hung out and listened to some really great bands. And there were food trucks parked all around. And we got this sort of amazing dish of shrimp and crawfish and sausage and corn and all kinds of amazing spices and crab cakes. And it was stellar, right? And you definitely got the sense that no matter which food truck you went to, you would have had a similarly outstanding meal. And that's sort of been my experience at other events in the city as well, is that people don't try and pass off, you know, half-baked food. People take it real seriously. And that makes it a great city. So just quickly wrapping up here, a bit of logistics here. Don't rent a car if you're going for the city. You can get around. It's a very walkable city. I think the only bit that gets a little bit questionable is if you're crossing from the Garden District into the sort of French Quarter. You have to go under some overpasses, and doing that late at night might be a little uncomfortable, especially for a solo female traveler, that kind of thing. So in that case, using an Uber or other form of transit makes sense. But in general, the city's very walkable. There's going to be lots of people out and about, so it feels pretty safe in general. And as I said, you can get Uber. There's also lots of transit in the city. So if you want to ride a streetcar, there's, I think, probably one named Desire. I don't know. It's not a reference I really understand. But there's lots of transit available as well. Traffic's not great getting in from the airport, but once you're sort of in the city proper, and especially if you're on foot, it's going to be a non-issue for you. It's just a great destination for a long weekend, or to extend a conference day. And don't stay in the conference hotel. I mean, you should never stay in the conference hotel, but like definitely don't stay in the conference hotel in New Orleans. But extending a conference stay by just a couple of days to enjoy the city is a really great way to get down there and explore. And one of the great things about its sort of location in the United States is that it's pretty accessible to everyone. Sort of whichever coast you're on, or on the North Coast here in Minnesota, it's a couple hour flight, and generally relatively affordable, sort of in the $300 range at the top end for nonstop out of Minneapolis, at least. So pretty accessible place, great place to go visit, sort of late fall here or late winter, so sort of October or March into April. It can get kind of cold in the winter, and it's not a city prepared for that. So we were there in December once, and our Airbnb didn't really have heat, and it was snowing. So that was a bit of a surprise, but that was an unusual event to the extent that they let schools out so that kids could go see snow. Anyways. As I said, definitely an Airbnb, stay in the 7th Ward or Treme area or the Garden District. And yeah, well, locals have an accent. Occasionally you'll encounter one of those real Cajun folks who probably don't live in the city. They're in the city doing something. And it can be an exciting opportunity to try and communicate. But I'm mostly joshing with this bullet point. So with that, I will wrap things up. I will say, stay tuned next month if you're around. We will be going to Milan, which I think is a really underrated city in Italy, a city that I think folks don't spend enough time in. So I'll make the case for doing an extended visit to Milan. And otherwise, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A widget, or you could just write them in the chat, I think, and I believe I can see that. And otherwise, I hope that you all have a really great night. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I needed to touch on here, but yeah, I got nothing, and I don't have any questions in my Q&A widget. So I'm sure Kat's furiously trying to come up with one, because she's wonderful, and we should all say how much we appreciate Kat. Anyways, oh, there we go. Is there a specific time of year you'd recommend visiting? Well, I think I just covered that. I have never been there in August. I would guess that it's not a great place to visit in August, just due to heat and humidity, and also the occasional hurricane that comes through there. So as I say, I think fall, spring, and you can sort of take fall and spring and nudge them a little closer to winter, because of course, at least northern winter. So yeah, October, March, April, probably end of March, I would say, is probably the sweet spot for a trip to New Orleans, where, especially if you live in the Midwest, you get to the end of March and you're thinking, shouldn't winter be over by now? Getting out of town for a long weekend is a really great opportunity. So that is what I got. Anyways, thanks, y'all. I hope I see you next month. And if you have questions or you want more information on New Orleans, feel free to reach out to me directly, or go on the website as well. It's just me. I've got some stuff about New Orleans on there as well, about what to do and see there as well. So thank you all. I don't remember how to stop recording.